Update on my tiny farm experiment. It's over. Back in 2019, I started a teeny tiny farm on a vacant lot in my neighborhood. It was an experiment in simple living to see if we might want to eventually relocate our family to the countryside. I set out to grow medicinal plants for teas, oils, and tinctures, and some heirloom veggies. I wanted to use the land to host homeschool meetups and herbalism classes, and I expected to have lots of friends come and help me. Everybody said they wanted to, and I was hoping to have their children around to play with my children and keep them occupied while I did long, boring hours of work in the hot sun. Instead, lockdown happened right as the first crops were going in over there. And I ended up doing it alone. And over the last 2 years, I learned a shit ton, namely that I do not want to turn my green thumb into a money-making business after all. I don't have the stamina for hail and caterpillars and mangled chickens. PDA kicked in, my persistent drive for autonomy. The garden was no longer in my flow. It was no longer a source of joy and an expression of autonomy. Gardening without flow is just a lot of hot digging and hauling and weed pulling. I couldn't do it anymore. It became a huge demand. I am so glad that I did that experiment instead of, when I got the itch, selling my house and packing up my family and moving away from our homeschooling community and our family and friends and hitting the countryside without any support system, buying some land and starting a farm and investing hundreds of thousands of dollars, only to discover once there, years deep into it, that I actually didn't want to live that lifestyle. Even if my PDA demand avoidance hadn't set in and made it difficult to even physically go over there, it would be over now anyway because I only had a 2-year agreement to use that land. So Starlight Garden always had a short-term lifespan. Perennial plants and the shed and the water collection system and the tools have all been moved to my property or donated to other gardens. Even the soil and the compost is being used elsewhere. Nothing has gone to waste, and it was a great pandemic project. I have no regrets. I'm really glad we did this. Even though I didn't know yet that I was PDA when I started the farm, I think that I was longing for a different way of living, a low-demand lifestyle that was human-paced, something that was better for my sense of sensory overwhelm. I was exhausted by the capitalism and the hustle that are required to live in a city like this. I was looking for something that was going to make my nervous system feel better. I thought that I wanted a farm because I had read all these books and blogs that made it seem like the best, purest, healthiest, safest, least toxic childhood that I could offer my children was one with as much free play in nature as possible. Unstructured, private time, just exploring land, getting bored, and finding imaginative ways to play and engage in nature. And living in the city, accessing a nature-based elementary school program is $15,000 to $29,000 a year per kid, and I have two. But instead of private schooling them in the city, if I'm unschooling them on land that we own out in the countryside, then they can run wild and free and barefoot in the woods for free. And if we live outside the internet service, then screen time and social media and stuff like that are not an issue that I have to deal with my kids. I was in love with nature schools and Waldorf and Montessori and Reggio, but I could not afford it. And I wanted to offer my boys this like beeswax scented wood, seashells, and wool type of childhood. Amazing unschoolers like Lucy Aiken-Reid in her New Zealand yurt, and Ben Hewitt of the book Homegrown, whose little boys grew up roaming the woods, living on a farm, trapping and skinning and building things. I had read Last Child in the Woods as an adult and Little House on the Prairie as a child. I was cottagecore before cottagecore was cool.
I don't actually think that Hewitt or Aiken-Reid were ever trying to say that nature-based unschooling was the only way to unschool. But I'm autistic, and when I was new in my journey, I was trying to find rules to follow. An unschooler following rules, I know. I was looking for role models to emulate because that's one of the ways that I navigate the world. So I took on their ways as a metric to measure whether or not I was unschooling right.
My kids love screens, and they love to be at home, and they love to play video games, and they love to shop, and they love to meet up with their friends and play. But you know what they don't love? Nature. Not as much as I do. And I think I have to respect that. They're YouTube unschoolers and not necessarily roaming the woods barefoot unschoolers. I mean, they might want to do that once a week, a couple times a month, but that's not their everyday. That's not where they find their bliss. It is legitimate for me to allow my children autonomy to follow their interests, even if their interests aren't exactly in line with my values and everything I've read and everything that I wanted for them. It's still legitimate.
I want our life to be in line with who our kids actually are and what they really want to learn. Not based on a fantasy that I had before they were even born, some idea of what a perfect childhood is supposed to be that I came up with before I even met them. And I could spend the next few years of their childhood fighting the Minecraft and YouTube and the knives and the Nerf guns. I could insist on only art and nature and music because that's what I value. That wouldn't give any of us the level of autonomy that I now know we all require. We need to leave the city, and we can afford a small piece of land in the countryside. And my farm fantasy was a way of me trying to figure out how to make that work for myself, a life that I could live under those circumstances.
Sometimes as a child, I lived in a small town and I was ostracized and treated like a smarty pants heathen. I much prefer the diversity of the city. Is there a place in the countryside for an autistic, Buddhist, pansexual where black and queer and disabled friends can be made? I thought that if I was an organic farmer that I would have a place in the community and something to do out there. If I couldn't find friends, I could create my own world, which is a very PDA thing to do. We don't know what we're going to do just yet, but we have eliminated one possibility. We probably won't be running a medicinal plant business. My favorite unschooler, Lucy Aiken-Reid, said today on her Instagram something about how we're not meant to be living the way that we're living. Human beings are supposed to be foraging for mushrooms alongside the members of our tribe. And I think that that's true for sensory avoidant neurodivergent people like me. Foraging mushrooms with friends sounds great, but not everybody likes mushrooms. Other people have been drawn to be warriors or explorers or traders, people that left their tribe and went elsewhere, met other tribes and mated with other people. spread their knowledge and their DNA to other communities. Some people have always been driven to live alone away from their tribe. They can't handle the sounds and movements and sights and smells of their tribe. They need to listen to the dark quiet of the forest even more than the people who live with other people. There's always been travelers and explorers, and there's always been people driven to meditate in a cave somewhere by themselves.